Part 4. Justice, Karma, and Meaning. Chapter 13. Guilt, Merit, and the Error of Traditional Justice. It's not things that disturb us, but the judgments we make about them. Epictetus. After crossing inevitability, an inevitable question arises. If we do not choose the origin of the will, if choice is inevitable, and if the degree of freedom varies according to conditions, does it still make sense to speak of guilt and merit? This question scares us because it seems to threaten the very idea of justice. But what is being questioned here is not justice itself. It is a confused way of understanding it. The most common way of thinking about justice starts from a silent assumption that a person could have been completely different in the same moment, under the same conditions. When someone does wrong, we say they should have acted differently. When someone does right, we say they deserve special recognition. The problem is that this should ignores almost everything that made that action possible. That form of justice demands something impossible, that the person had been different before acting. Here it is important to make a simple but decisive distinction. The person is, without a doubt, responsible for what they do. They act, decide, execute. The action is theirs. But that does not mean they chose to be who they are. No one chose their personality, their sensitivity, their impulses, their temperament, their capacity for self-control, their way of reacting to the world. All of that was already present when the action happened. These conditions are not outside the person. They're the person in that moment. When we demand from someone as if they had chosen to be who they are, we are demanding something that was never available. That is where a kind of guilt is born that does not teach, does not correct, and does not improve anyone. It only paralyzes. But here comes the decisive point. Real justice does not work like that. Justice does not analyze whether an action could or could not have been avoided given all the causes involved. It does not investigate whether the person, in any deep sense, did or did not have another possibility. This simply is not part of its function. Justice works with rules. Every society establishes a set of norms that must be followed for coexistence to be possible. These rules exist to contain wills that, if carried out freely, would bring confusion, conflict, and chaos. Justice does not judge desires. It responds to behaviors. That is why the central question of justice is not, why did you do that, but was the rule crossed or not? And if it was, what consequences are necessary to restore order and prevent the same behavior from repeating? In this sense, there is no contradiction at all between recognizing that an action was inevitable and still applying consequences. The function of justice is not to punish people for being who they are, but to organize life in common. Laws, norms, and sanctions do not exist to judge the inner life of people, but to regulate external actions. They do not demand that everyone have the same degree of self-control or awareness. They only demand that certain limits be respected so that society can function. The error of traditional justice is not in holding people responsible, but in turning that accountability into absolute personal judgment. When that happens, justice stops organizing and starts humiliating. It stops correcting and starts condemning. When we understand this difference, justice becomes firmer and more humane at the same time. The rules continue to exist. The consequences continue to be applied, but they stop carrying the implicit idea that someone failed by pure personal choice, as if everything were equally available to everyone. Guilt and merit then change place. Guilt stops being condemnation for the impossible and becomes recognition that a limit was crossed. Merit stops being a sign of personal superiority and becomes the result of favorable conditions well used. Neither of the two speaks of who the person is in essence. Both speak of coexistence and learning. Here, the crossing begins to close with clarity. What seemed to threaten justice, in fact, strengthens it. By abandoning the fantasy that we judge totally free choices, we begin to practice a justice that is more honest, more effective, and less cruel. In the next chapter, this view will be deepened through the idea of karma as harvest. We will see how consequences are not arbitrary punishments, but natural responses that organize learning and transformation over time. For now, stay with this central idea. Justice does not judge what could have been different. It establishes limits so that life in common is possible. Reconciliation is almost complete. To understand is an intellectual act that is not the same as absolving. Hannah Arendt.